first Ghost in the Shell movie is a classic, but often overlooked, I think, is the sequel, Ghost in the Shell 2: Innocence. It seems considerably different, and really there's a lot that immediately sets it apart from the original. The strange implementation of 3D CGI into 2D cell animation, this repeated use of biblical or philosophical quotes, and the convoluted narrative, which will not slow down for you to catch up, and yet moves so slowly. It's like the exact opposite of the first Ghost in the Shell, which had a pretty slow pace, but you can only complicate a narrative so much in an 82-minute runtime. But in a few meaningful ways, Ghost in the Shell 2 is almost a reflection of the original, or more so a repeat. This is actually somewhat logical, and why the movie works as a sequel more so than as a standalone film, which is good because we're building on something. We've swapped out protagonists, where the Major was the heroine of the first movie, and Bato is the hero of the second. Two characters, one journey. Bato and the Major eventually arrive at the same place, but of course, the getting there looks different each time. Both movies work toward the same revelation, which has entirely to do with the Major's self-actualization. The first movie, despite being an adaptation, feels like it's specifically designed to tell the Major's story. She's the field commander for Public Security Section 9, and has been a full-body replacement cyborg for long enough that she has no memory of her original body. And the robot body, the eponymous shell, belongs more to the government than it does to her. Then along comes the puppet master, who can remotely implant false memories, and she gives up the ghost as well. In this world, the Major owns nothing of herself, so in the end, she recreates herself, claiming an ownership that poor Bato just can't wrap his head around.
That's bullshit, okay? Stop with the angst.
For the Major, it's about her identity, and critical to her self-acceptance is joining the net, which, by the way, is vast and infinite. To all outside appearances, she vanished. For Bato, the Major's self-acceptance registered as the mysterious loss of a friend, and so in driving, investigating, and shooting his way to the truth of where the Major went, his journey is about grief. This is something that Brian Rue points out in the second edition of his excellent book, Stray Dog: The Films of Mamoru Oshii, and grief as a primary theme for the movie is a requisite foundation for understanding the rest of what is at once a fundamentally foreign, yet commercial film, but also an intensely personal expression. But something we need to address, along that line, is the dialogue in this movie. Some personal expression using a bunch of other writers' work to stand in for his own.
彼ら秋の花ごとく群がり落ち、狂乱した混沌は吠えたけり。今度はミルトンか。だが俺たちはサタンじゃねえぜ。
Well, literary or historical allusions are a shorthand for ideas, and that's kind of what writing is conceptually. It's a shorthand for communication. At every level of abstraction, modes of expressions are borrowed, not to trivialize the potential fraudulence of plagiarizing, of course. There's a better thematic explanation for it, I think. Of course, for instant recall of these quotes, Bato has clandestine access to Google behind those eyes, but there's this idea of connectivity. Bato invokes history in a broader global culture, and applies it to this dreamy future world, which itself can't decide where or when it really is. Universal human experience through the arts and literature and religious studies, this is the constant throughout, no matter where we end up. These quotes are mostly existential, questioning reality and the meaning of existence, but that's on the terms of the audience's benefit. In a more meaningful way, this is how our heroes choose to grapple with the main themes of the story, searching for rationalizations to the wacky, wonderful things they encounter. Like, please, somebody before me must have made sense of what I'm feeling. Ghost in the Shell 2's reserved pace and obfuscating dialect frustrate the potential appreciation for its concise story structure. Because this is a mystery, we'll have to work backward from the ending revelation and consider it not only essential, but the linchpin of the entire story. That's what helped me begin to understand the movie, though understanding it is an ongoing work, as it arguably is with all movies. So here we have something of a story structure, although it is not a temporal one like Act 1, 2, and 3. I might break it up instead as character, and then plot and theme, and then problem and solution on the ends there. So if we begin at the start here, we establish the problem to be solved by the end. The way this movie works on the basic level is that this is a character problem, and it's solved by function of the plot, as guided by theme. Each works together and dovetails in the end, mathematical beauty, and with a deliberateness that speaks to a singular vision, alongside what's more instantly apparent like the beauty of the art design. So this character problem is outlined at the very start, in a previously on Ghost in the Shell. As we know, the Major is gone, or possibly dead, and Bato misses her. We explore the depth of this problem with these scenes depicting Bato's home life, which is lonely but for a basset hound named Gabriel. We've seen this exact scene before in Oshii's most acclaimed live-action film, Avalon. In that movie, the main character, Ash, is disconnected from her physical reality, so while the virtual world of Avalon is exciting and dangerous, her real world is sad and lonely. We see this too with Bato, but Ghost in the Shell 2 is not ripping off the earlier film so much as both movies share a common source, Mamoru Oshii's personal life. He doesn't relate to human beings so easily, preferring dogs instead, and indeed he has a basset hound named Gabriel. Ultimately, in her absence, we understand the scope of the Major's presence, that she left a hole in Bato's life. And that hole is more like a void that swallowed up the vibrant, if decaying, Hong Kong facsimile of the original movie. In place of that environment is this new city, which works as a reflection of Bato's mental landscape. As such, there are bits and pieces we might associate with the Major. There's this dreamlike distrust of reality, exemplified by the allegedly poor match of 2D and 3D animation, and most importantly, it's dark. Section 9 is consumed by shadow. It has no geography, it's just blackness. For almost its entire runtime, Ghost in the Shell 2 takes place after hours. Although it doesn't make too much literal sense, unless they're actually on a spaceship the whole time, it makes figurative sense. When the Major walked out of Bato's life, the sun was going down, and so for Bato, it's been night ever since. We come to Ghost in the Shell 2 for the third part of our structure here for plot/theme, the investigation. Theoretically, of course, because the real reason we watch something like this is because it's called Ghost in the Shell 2. But the second act of movies is usually what's on sale, the film's content, the meat of the experience. In science fiction films, sometimes the second act is all there is, or it's non-existent, after a high-concept first act setup. In this film, the unfolding plot is our facility to reaching the solution to Bato's problem. It's economic, especially when we consider the fruits of this mathematical formula, like hand to claw, with an illegal Chinese model cyborg. Section 9 is investigating the murders of men by female androids designed for sex, gynoids, naturally. It may be a malfunction, but when Section 9 gets involved, you begin to think something else is going on. To find out what, Bato and Tokusa pay a visit to the crime lab, the creepy and sterile domain of one Haraway, no first name. Of course, because the first name is Donna, after the feminist scholar whose work A Cyborg Manifesto was doubtlessly an influence on Oshii. The ensuing discussion is oblique and becomes almost surreal, but for the most part establishes the why of the case, that these gynoids had illegal ghosts downloaded onto them to make them more human. This scene also introduces the main thematic pieces, the relationship between humans and their creations. This time, and this is a big change for cyberpunk, it's not exactly about what does this simulacrum say about us, but what does this simulacrum say? If we gave it a voice, would it speak or would it scream? But seriously, a round of applause for cyberpunk. This is baby steps. We intertwine this A plot, let's say, about the gynoids, with a subplot, this kind of impending doom.
You've stepped inside the kill zone.
Bato is being watched, but as we see, it's a guardian angel over his shoulder. This is also important. In hindsight, it's an expression of the truth behind the Major's disappearance. It drops here for the usual dramatic reasons, but also I suspect to lead up to that final revelation, so that the Major coming back from the dead isn't a complete shocker. And then we come upon our friend Kim, resident laughing man and center of the film's most chilling sequence. By the way, Ghost in the Shell 2 is certified PG-13 in the United States, where the original was R-rated, but that was mostly for nudity. If you're a young and naive parent looking to watch these movies with the youngins, which is not probably advised, Ghost in the Shell, the first one, might weird your kid in like a sexual way, but Ghost in the Shell 2 will give your kid nightmares. In the tradition of existence in Avalon, Tokusa becomes trapped in a hallucinatory loop of the same scene, and Bato has to break him free. It's a more intimate look at the cyberbrain invasions introduced in the first movie as tragic, where a lonely loser can be convinced he has a family. And here, the terror of being trapped in a mind game is illustrated on the periphery with a creepy marionette mansion mise-en-scène. It's mortifying. After we settle down, Kim begins to philosophize and seems to continue the narrative begun by Haraway. He talks about how we don't cry for the gutted fish, and while Bato appears all business, I think this narrative is sinking in. In the standalone complex Mythos, Tokusa is the least cyborg member of Section 9, in terms of field members, along with Saito, the sniper. There isn't really a Section 9 in the Oshii movies, but this fact still holds true, and the detective's physical vulnerability sets him apart from Bato. And yet, it's Bato who feels like the outsider, the quiet loner who can't fully relate to the human Togasa with his family, and so he goes searching for the polar opposite. For Bato, the welcome home party awaits at the bottom of the ocean, as far from civilization as he can get. He takes a deep dive and infiltrates the Locus Solus submarine. Now, Locus Solus is a French science fiction novel from 1914, but it's also the name of the gynoid manufacturer. You gotta figure social stigma keeps them so out of sight, but Bato sees all with those sleepless eyes. The Major returns, partially downloading herself in a gynoid, and she helps Bato before he's overrun by killer sex mannequins. We learn the nature of Locus Solus's connection to the Yakuza, that the mob was trafficking in young girls who are kept on the submarine, and ghost dubbed into the gynoids. A copy of the girl's mind is downloaded into the sex doll, making it more realistic. The victim at the crime scene earlier was a Locus Solus employee, Jack Volkerson, who wanted to rescue the girls by essentially programming the gynoids to kill, which would attract police attention. Ghost dubbing originated in the story on which this film is loosely based, Robot Rondo, from the Ghost in the Shell manga, and was also featured in the episode Idolator from the first season of Standalone Complex. The imprinting of sentience on gynoids, and programmed self-destructive sentience at that, fits nicely as the final piece of Haraway and Kim's thematic framework. Mirroring our image in our creations without regard for the consequence is a violation of the creation's agency. So now we're beginning to think about the creation. Children and dolls, anthropomorphizing dogs, crying for the gutted fish. There is this overall indication that we need to expand our definition of life, develop a broader empathy for things, as more and more things are being introduced, like androids and life forms born on the sea of information. Gynoids deserve this empathy too, but instead they're used up and thrown away. We do to them what we will, whether sex, death, or a forced birth that overrides identity. As the Major says,
Blessed are those with voices. If those dolls had voices, I bet each and every one of them would have screamed, I don't want to be a human.
I need to.
And so we return to our structure, and now we can connect everything. And just in time, because the question still hanging is, why? Why empathy for gynoids? What does that mean? Well, relax. We're at the finish line. Take a load off. The Major is here now, and if there's anything she's good at, it's making people feel comfortable.
I'm leaving.
Bato is now able to look at the Major in a new light. Although it's not exactly made explicit, his relationship to the world is changed. His definition of life has expanded to encompass the gynoid, and now the Major. He can finally reconcile what she's become, because he no longer thinks in black and white, life and death. And for the audience, we have a parallel revelation that the Major is back, where she returns in this partial form, indicating that not only is she very much alive and kicking, she'll always be there. For Bato, it's this lengthy philosophical justification, but for the audience who doesn't necessarily inhabit the character's headspace, there's a better shorthand for the same message, and it's more tangible and more entertaining. Freaky, though. And so the resolution of the plot of the homicidal gynoid case is also the resolution of the character, and the whole thing was driven by this very Oshii, almost alien worldview that is at once bizarre, but on closer inspection perhaps all too human. All the pieces of the story connect, each of them matter, and each of them offers something valuable in themselves. Perfect cinematic storytelling philosophy. The science fiction police procedural is a wonderful vehicle for philosophy of any kind. The detectives will uncover not only the culprit, but some cosmic truth about the nature of all things. Someone like Oshii naturally makes great use of this, as he did with the first two Patlabor movies. And as with those two, the filmmaker has this talent to take something fantastical and recognize something familiar within. I wish there was more like this movie, because as much as I love the first movie, and Standalone Complex, Second Gig in particular, Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence haunts me like no other. It isn't the easiest movie to watch all the time, you're not just going to throw that in the player, but its world and visuals are just as beautiful as its message. A rewarding movie, and also a rare one. The closest antecedents in the genre, I suppose, are Jinro, but mostly Blade Runner, and that's something that we say about all cyberpunk. In terms of tone, if you like Ghost in the Shell 2, I'd also highly recommend Memories of Murder and True Detective Season 1. They're close, and they're all good for different reasons, But this movie has a certain something that isn't easily replicated. Sometimes you can't just copy something into a new form, and maybe it's best we don't try. The Ghost in the Shell franchise lives on over 10 years later, and it continues to evolve, and as if by magic, it's still good.
若林って野郎に話がある。呼んでこい。